Minister, I think if we're honest, the purpose of this bill today, which is being rushed through the Dáil in an emergency by yourself with the support, it would seem, of all your party, Green Party colleagues, is to bypass current environmental protection legislation. And it's not about shortening that process, it's about bypassing it, fast-tracking it, streamlining it, and to avoid an environmental impact assessment for two emergency projects, our Tarbert and the Shannon Bridge. And this is the third piece of legislation rammed through this chamber in this manner in the past 6 months to deal with the same issue. And the panic comes not from the fact that EirGrid were issuing amber alerts at an alarming rate. Last year they were. The grid can't keep up with that demand, we're told. The war in Ukraine, Putin's plans, the wind not blowing, have all conspired to push us towards the brink of blackouts. And that's why we have to bypass norms and safeguards in this chamber and fast-track legislation, and why that legislation is bulldozing over environmental impact assessments. That's why a Green Minister is pushing in legislation to facilitate 450 megawatts of gas-fired carbon belching emergency plant. It's unbelievable, and it's worth thinking about what that means. The Green Party have 3 times now pushed through emergency legislation, bypassing planning laws and regulation and environmental safeguards because we have an emergency in power supply. But that emergency does not stem from Putin's machinations, nor from our geography or precarious connections to other markets, and not because the wind doesn't blow occasionally. It stems from the fact that uniquely in Europe, our power demand has grown at a time when we need to shift from fossil fuel reliance to renewable energy. When COVID-related peaks and troughs are excluded, Ireland is unique in the European Union in having power demand increase by 9% over the last 5 years. The EU average for 27 nations is flatlining, and many comparative nations have seen declines in electricity demand over the same years. That demand increase is not natural, it's not normal or explicable as a result of our success in building a better society for our people, like homes for people. It's driven by the obscene needs of data centres and the obsequiousness of this state when dealing with the demands and the wish lists of big tech and international corporations. The Green Party have fought the corner of the data centre industry, spinning a fairy tale that we can have unlimited growth in data centres and it'll be fine as we grow our offshore renewable sector. We can't do it, Minister. We can't address the climate crisis by handing over the keys to state policy, to private investment firms or to big tech. And this is what happens when you try to marry climate and social goals to the imperatives of capitalism and big business. You end up with the farce of a Green Party minister tearing up environmental legislation in order not to ensure that the lights stay on in people's homes or hospitals, but that data centre coolers remain cool, such as Meta, Amazon and Twitter, as they burn up and drive our electricity demand. We now have over 70 such centres. 16 more will be connected to the grid soon. 4 more have applications filed or pending. 12 centres are talking to EirGrid about their plans, while the ESB is reviewing 5 more separate ones. Meanwhile, we find that Gas Networks Ireland are separately processing applications for 11 data centre connections to the gas grid. And so we went from data centre consuming 5% of our electricity to 11% in 5 years. And it will jump from the current 15% to 30% in double quick time. A sector whose energy demands rose by 144% in 5 years, and a sector that is single-handedly propelling us to the likely power cuts that this legislation is trying to head off. And so your party minister are fast-tracking the purchase of gas-fired generators, bypassing planning and environmental regulation in order to facilitate data centre proliferation. It's as simple as that, and no other excuse will mask that. And it's in stark contrast to your latest approach to the idea of free public transport and how it might cause unnecessary trips by some people. And I wonder, does that equate those unnecessary trips with those who currently avail of free public transport, pensioners, people with disabilities, etc.? A last observation on this bill and the previous ones. It's still unclear to me from the briefing provided by the Minister and officials if the phrase in the previous bill that the bypassing of planning and environmental regulation applies only to the sitting generators at Tarbert and at Shannon Bridge. The previous bill added the words or alternative appropriate sites. And then the question becomes, Minister, are we setting a precedent that any minister or government in the future can simply say, this is an emergency, so X or Y site can also bypass these rules? Could, for example, Amazon or Meta say that their demand for a gas-fired generation in the future is also an emergency? Could any other site detailed here be suddenly pushed, not detailed here, be suddenly pushed to the front of a planning process without planning or environmental regulations applying? And this is the problem with emergency legislation, as already been outlined by some deputies in the Dáil here, that it facilitates the tearing up of existing safeguards. It's a slippery slope, I believe, Minister, and we cannot say for definite that it ends here.